A low, guttural hum vibrated through the floorboards, a sound that had become the unwelcome soundtrack to their lives. Claire, a woman whose life had been built on order and empirical data, stood at the kitchen window, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The sky, once a brilliant expanse of blue, was now a sickly, bruised orange. The air, thick and heavy, carried the scent of dry dust and something else, something metallic and alien. It was the scent of a dying world. She ran her hand over a small framed photo on the windowsill, a picture of herself, younger, with bright eyes and a diploma in astrophysics. She had once charted the cosmos, searching for new worlds. Now, she watched one fade away. The irony was a bitter pill she swallowed every morning. Behind her, David was trying to make things feel normal. The scent of pancakes, a desperate attempt at normalcy, filled the air. He moved with a quiet grace, his hands, once skilled in shaping clay, now carefully flipping breakfast for their daughter. "Breakfast is ready, my love," he said, his voice soft, a fragile shield against the impending chaos. He avoided her eyes, a silent agreement not to acknowledge the elephant in the room. The comet, known as the Harbinger, a looming celestial executioner. 7-year-old Sophie sat at the small round table, a crayon gripped tightly in her hand. Her drawing was of a family of stick figures, holding hands under a yellow sun. The sun had a smile on its face. The innocent cheerfulness of the image felt like a punch to Claire's gut. Sophie looked up, her bright green eyes filled with a question Claire had been dreading. "Mommy, why is the sky so red?" she asked, her voice a gentle, innocent chime. Claire's heart ached. She knelt down, her scientific training battling with her maternal instinct. She wanted to tell her the truth, to prepare her, but a part of her, the part that still held on to hope, couldn't bring herself to do it. "It's just a big cloud, sweetie," she lied, her voice cracking slightly. "The sun is hiding." David's head snapped up. He shot Claire a look, a mix of hurt and defiance. He wanted to shield Sophie from the truth, to let her last days be filled with beautiful lies. But Claire knew that ignoring reality was a luxury they no longer had. The low hum outside grew louder, a promise of what was to come. And the sky, a canvas of impending doom, only deepened in its grotesque, bloody hue. The Harbinger was getting closer, and the family's fragile peace was about to shatter. The next few weeks were a delicate dance of denial and dread. The hum had become a constant companion, a low-frequency bass note to their lives. Every morning, Claire went through the motions of a life she no longer believed in. She read news updates in hushed tones, the numbers and predictions of the Harbinger's trajectory etched into her mind like a scar. The scientific detachment she once prided herself on was now a flimsy curtain, barely hiding the terror in her heart. David, meanwhile, retreated deeper into his world of art. He had set up his old easel in the living room, a defiant splash of color against the grays and oranges of the encroaching apocalypse. He painted Sophie, not as she was now, but as he remembered her laughing in a field of sunflowers, her eyes sparkling with the unburdened joy of a life that would never be. He painted with a frantic urgency, as if he could capture every precious moment and hold it forever on the canvas. "What's the point, David?" Claire had asked one evening, her voice sharp with a frustration born of fear. "We should be conserving our energy, our supplies, not wasting time on this." She gestured to the half-finished canvas, her hand trembling. He put down his brush, a smear of yellow ochre on his thumb. "The point, Claire," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "is that this is all we have left. These memories, this beauty. What's the point of surviving if we forget what it was like to live?" His words hung in the air, a profound chasm opening between them. Sophie, catching a glimpse of the tension, pulled on Claire's sleeve. "Mommy, Daddy, look!" she said, her voice a small beacon of light. She held up her latest drawing. It wasn't a sun or a family anymore. It was a picture of the red sky with a huge smiling star in the middle. "That's the big cloud," she explained, pointing to the star. "He looks so happy." Claire and David looked at the drawing, then at each other. Sophie's innocent interpretation of the comet, of the harbinger of their doom, was a cruel, beautiful irony. Claire felt a tear trace a hot path down her cheek, a silent admission that David was right. The truth was a burden they couldn't place on their daughter, but the lies were becoming harder to bear. Claire started a new ritual. Every night after Sophie was asleep, she would pull out her old astrophysics textbooks, her fingers tracing the faded diagrams of galaxies and nebulae. She wasn't looking for a miracle. She was searching for a reason. A mathematical constant she might have missed, a variable that could alter the harbinger's course by a fraction of a degree. She was trying to outsmart a cosmic inevitability. Her mind, once her greatest asset, was now her prison, forcing her to confront the cold, hard facts of their impending doom. David, meanwhile, had found solace in an old Super 8 camera he'd unearthed from the attic. He started filming everything. Sophie's laughter as she chased a butterfly, the way the last light of the sun hit the leaves of their wilting garden, Claire's tired profile as she stared into the night sky. He wasn't just documenting their lives. He was trying to preserve them, to create a physical record of their existence that would outlive the cataclysm. One evening, he found Claire hunched over a laptop, her face illuminated by the cold blue light of a final, desperate calculation. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice gentle. "I'm just checking the data," she said, her voice strained. "The harbinger's trajectory. There has to be something." He knelt beside her, his hand covering hers on the keyboard. "Claire, there's nothing. You know that. We both do." He paused, his gaze soft but firm. "Stop looking at the end. Look at us. Look at her." He gestured towards Sophie, who was sleeping peacefully in her bed. "Let's just be here for a little while longer." Tears welled up in Claire's eyes, a dam of suppressed emotion finally breaking. She leaned her head against his shoulder, the weight of the world on her shoulders momentarily lifted. The cold, sterile numbers on the screen blurred into an unreadable mess, but for the first time in weeks, she wasn't a scientist facing the end of the world. She was a wife, a mother, and she was terrified. David held her tight, his love a small, warm pocket of resistance against the cosmic coldness that was slowly but surely consuming their world. One day, as the sky outside had taken on a new, deep crimson hue, David made a decision. He pulled out the Super 8 camera and a box of old tapes. Instead of just filming, he set up the television and a projector. "Come on, girls," he said, his voice full of a rare, determined cheerfulness. "Movie night." He projected onto the living room wall, not the usual cartoons, but old home movies from before the Harbinger. There they were, younger, happier, a family in a world that was still whole. Sophie, a toddler with chubby cheeks, toddled across a green lawn. Claire laughed, her hair blowing in the wind, a smile so genuine it was almost foreign now. David himself, free of the haunted look he now wore, was tossing Sophie into the air, her squeals of delight filling the silent room. Sophie watched, mesmerized. "Is that us?" she whispered, her finger tracing the images on the wall. "Yes, sweetie," David said, his arm wrapped around Claire's shoulders. "That was our garden. That was our life." Claire felt a pang of profound sadness and something else, a fragile warmth she hadn't felt in months. Watching their past selves, so blissfully unaware of the future, was both a comfort and a torture. It was a reminder of what they were losing, but also a testament to what they had. Suddenly, the screen flickered, and a new scene appeared. It was a video of David himself, taken years ago, hunched over his easel. The camera focused on his hands, then panned up to the canvas. It was a painting of a beautiful swirling nebula, full of blues and purples and sparkling stars. But right in the center, there was a small, dark shape, a tiny, almost imperceptible smudge that looked eerily like the Harbinger. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She remembered that painting. He'd never finished it. He'd said he couldn't get the colors right. But now, seeing that little smudge, she knew it wasn't the colors. It was a premonition, a flicker of something he'd seen or felt that he couldn't put into words. It was a chilling foreshadowing of a truth that was not just scientific, but deeply personal. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. The image of David's unfinished painting, with its ominous dark smudge, replayed in her mind. It wasn't a coincidence. It was something more, something she, the pragmatist, couldn't explain. She went to his studio, a small dusty room filled with canvases, dried-out paints, and the ghost of his past life. She rummaged through a stack of his old notebooks, filled with sketches and half-formed ideas. On the last page of one of them, she found it. It wasn't a painting or a sketch. It was a note, written in his familiar, flowing script. The Harbinger, a song of light, not of stone. Beside it was a strange, intricate symbol, like a cluster of stars forming a pattern she couldn't recognize. Claire felt a shiver run down her spine. A song of light, not of stone. It sounded like poetry, but to her it felt like a puzzle. What could it possibly mean? Was he talking about the comet itself, a different kind of cosmic body than they all believed? Or was it just the ramblings of a man who saw the world through an artist's lens? The next morning, she confronted him. "David," she began, her voice tight, holding up the notebook. "What is this? What did you mean?" He looked at the page, a pained expression on his face. He took the notebook and gently closed it. "It was just a dream, Claire, an old dream." He turned away, his shoulders slumped. "It wasn't just a dream," she insisted, her voice rising. "It was in that painting, years ago, before any of this. How could you know?" He sighed, finally turning to face her. His eyes, usually so full of gentle warmth, were now clouded with a deep sadness. "I don't know how. I just felt it. It was a feeling I had in my bones. I tried to paint it away, but I couldn't." He paused, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I'm sorry, Claire. I'm so sorry." His apology wasn't for the note or the painting. It was for the inevitable. The truth, in all its terrifying glory, was too much for either of them to bear, and yet it was right there, between them, a silent, unspoken dread. For weeks after their strained conversation, a new kind of silence settled over the house. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a home, but the heavy stillness of a tomb. The Harbinger filled the sky now, a monstrous glowing eye that stared down at them, a constant, undeniable presence. Its light was so bright at night that the stars were no longer visible, and the days were filled with an eerie orange glow that cast long, unnatural shadows. David retreated even further, spending all his time in his studio. He wasn't painting anymore. He was building. He had found an old, broken telescope in the garage, a relic from Claire's past, and he was meticulously taking it apart, his brow furrowed in concentration. The sound of tools clinking against metal was the only noise coming from his room, a stark contrast to the low, oppressive hum from outside. Claire, seeing his obsession, finally broke the silence. "David, what are you doing?" she asked one afternoon, standing in the doorway. "What's the point? It's not going to change anything." He didn't look up. I'm not trying to change anything, Claire. I'm trying to understand. He held up a small, gleaming lens. This, he said, his voice distant, is a piece of your old life. It was meant to look out, to see things far away. I'm just trying to make it look in, to see what's here. She didn't understand. She saw a man losing his mind, clinging to a meaningless task. But for the first time, she saw a flicker of the old David in his eyes, the artist, the dreamer, the man who saw things differently. The scientist in her wanted to laugh at his folly, but the wife in her was simply sad. The end was a few days away, and they were more distant than ever. Their last moments were slipping away, and they were spending them in separate rooms, in separate worlds with separate griefs. That evening the low hum from outside intensified, a high-pitched whine now joining the deep bass. The sky, a canvas of fire, pulsed with an unnerving rhythmic light. The Harbinger was no longer just an object in the sky. It was a presence, a living entity that dominated their world. Claire found David in his studio, surrounded by his strange project. He had taken apart the old telescope and reassembled its lenses into a curious conical device, a sort of makeshift kaleidoscope. In its center, he had placed the strange symbol he had drawn in his notebook, carved into a small obsidian stone he had found in the backyard. "What is that?" she asked, a flicker of curiosity momentarily overcoming her fear. "It's a lens," he said, holding it up, "to see things differently." He looked at her, his eyes serious. "Claire, remember that painting? The Harbinger wasn't a destructive force. It was a dark, silent place in a sea of light. I think the science is wrong." The scientist in Claire bristled. "David, that's absurd. The data is clear. It's a comet. A rock. It's going to hit." "But what if it's not a rock?" He countered, his voice trembling with a fragile conviction. "What if it's an idea? A cosmic thought? I saw a different kind of light, Claire. Not a star's light. A song." He held out the strange lens. "Just look through it. Please." She hesitated, her rational mind screaming in protest. But the desperation in his eyes, the absolute certainty, was too strong to ignore. She took the device from him, holding it up to her eye. The world outside, the crimson sky, and the monstrous comet all came into focus through the prism of his creation. But instead of the impending doom she expected, she saw a chaotic, swirling vortex of colors, a beautiful, violent storm. And at its very center, the small, dark smudge from David's painting glowed with a soft, pulsing light, like a heartbeat. It wasn't a rock. It wasn't a destructive force. It was something else, something she couldn't explain. And for the first time she felt not just fear, but a profound, overwhelming sense of awe. Claire pulled the device away from her eye, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at David, and in his eyes she saw not the madness she'd expected, but a deep, profound sadness. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. He took the device back, his hands trembling. "I don't know, Claire, but I know that the scientific facts, the numbers, the trajectory, they were only part of the story. They were the melody, but not the lyrics." He gestured towards the painting of the nebula, now a blurry memory. That dark spot, it wasn't an emptiness. It was the point where the song began. His words, once the rambling of a romantic, now sounded like a terrifying truth. The hum from outside swelled, and the windows rattled in their frames. The Harbinger was closer than ever, its light so bright that it hurt to look at. The world was on fire, a beautiful, horrifying blaze. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice cracking. "What do we tell Sophie?" David didn't answer. He walked over to the closet and pulled out a small, worn box. Inside were his old Super 8 films. "We show her the truth," he said, his voice resolute. "Not the scientific truth, but our truth. The truth of who we are and who we were." He put the first reel on the projector. It was a video of him and Claire years ago on a beach. He was painting, and she was pointing to a constellation in the night sky. Their younger selves, so full of life and hope, were a haunting reminder of the life they were about to lose. Sophie, who had woken up from the noise, stumbled into the room, rubbing her eyes. She saw the images on the wall, her parents, happy and full of love. She didn't understand the impending doom, but she felt the love. And in that love, for the first time in a long time, the family found a fragile peace. They were an island in a sea of red. The Harbinger filled the sky, a spectacular and terrifying sight, a massive orange sphere with a glowing, pulsing core. Its gravity was already beginning to take hold. The water in the kitchen sink rippled, a low, rhythmic vibration that echoed the hum from outside. Dust motes danced in the unnaturally bright light that poured through the window, swirling in a macabre ballet. Claire, David, and Sophie sat on the floor, huddled together. The projector was still on, casting the final scene of an old home movie onto the wall, David smiling, holding a tiny, gurgling Sophie in his arms. The image was a beautiful ghost, a memory of a time when the world was simple and their greatest worry was a misplaced pacifier. "Daddy, what's that?" Sophie asked, her small finger pointing not at the screen, but at the window. The hum had changed, rising in pitch to a high-frequency whine that made her ears hurt. David held her tighter. "It's the Harbinger, sweetie," he said, his voice a soft murmur. He didn't use the lies they'd once employed. There was no more time for them. "It's a very special star." He looked at Claire, a question in his eyes. Claire knew what he was asking. It was her turn to speak the truth. She looked at the red sky, at the beautiful, terrible light, and remembered the swirling chaos she'd seen through David's lens. It wasn't a rock. It wasn't a destructive force. It was something new, something she had no words for. "He's right, honey," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "It's a very special star, coming to say hello to our world." Sophie nodded, her brow furrowed in thought. The innocence in her expression was a stark contrast to the apocalyptic backdrop. "Is he going to take our world away?" she asked, her voice small and vulnerable. Claire and David exchanged a long, heartbreaking look. There were no more words left. The hum was now a roar, and the light from the Harbinger intensified, casting their living room in a blinding, beautiful white. A strange, resonant song seemed to fill the air, not a sound you heard with your ears, but a vibration you felt in your soul. The end was here. The roar became a symphony, a beautiful, terrifying crescendo of sound and light. The house shuddered, the windows shattering inward with a deafening crash. Glass shards, caught in the blinding white light, glittered like 1,000 tiny diamonds before turning to dust. The walls began to crumble, the world outside collapsing into a vortex of swirling reds, oranges, and blinding white. Claire squeezed her eyes shut, but the light was so intense she could see it through her eyelids, a violent, pulsating rhythm that was both painful and mesmerizing. She held Sophie tight, her body a shield against the falling debris. David, on her other side, was a fortress of love, his arms wrapped around both of them. He wasn't looking at the chaos. He was looking at Claire, a silent conversation passing between them. She understood. In this final moment, the science, the data, the logic she had held so dear, all of it was meaningless. The Harbinger wasn't a rock or a cosmic event. It was the end of their world and the beginning of something else. David's artistic vision, his emotional truth had been right all along. The end wasn't a quiet, empty void. It was a beautiful, violent, resonant song. A final, blinding flash of light engulfed them. The roar reached its peak, and then a profound, all-encompassing silence. Claire felt a sense of weightlessness, a strange, peaceful calm. She was no longer afraid. In the last moments, they weren't a scientist, a painter, and a 7-year-old girl. They were a family, held together by a love that was stronger than any comet, any science, any end of the world. They had found their truth, not in the stars, but in each other. And in that truth, they were finally, beautifully at peace.